It's been said that in politics, you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. Let's take two examples. In Brazil and South Africa, large social movements for democracy organized under slogans that matched their political ambitions. In the mid-1980s in Brazil, millions took to the streets to demand direct elections now. At the same time, in South Africa, millions were organizing to insist on people's power. For many, the first direct democratic elections in Brazil and South Africa felt like a new beginning. Poetry. But when new city governments took power, they often came to power with slogans that were a bit more, well, how should I put this? Let's just say that talking about municipal budgets and bureaucratic changes isn't particularly well suited for a political sloganeering. It's definitely more like prose. In 1989, the new mayor in Sao Paulo came to power promising an inversion of priorities in the city's budget. Now, that may sound like just moving some numbers around on a spreadsheet, but what it really meant was changing the priorities of public investment in the city to end the inequalities between the sprawling informal settlements known as favelas and wealthy apartment blocks with their private pools and tennis courts. In 1994, in Johannesburg, the new ruling party came to power promising one city with one tax base. And the idea was similar: to end the inequalities between formal residential areas and the dense informal settlements of shacks known as imjondolos. My research is about the vast chasm between democracy's promise of political equality and the enduring inequalities of urban life. Across the globe, deep inequalities are shaking the foundations of democracy. Most people live in cities, and within the next 10 years, there will be over 40 megacities that are home to at least 10 million people. These are some of the fastest growing places on Earth. Our urban world is defined by inequalities to basic public goods. I'm talking about things like housing, sanitation, and transportation. In most cities, the most powerful people are usually property developers and associations in wealthy neighborhoods. What's critical here is the role of social movements, especially for housing. These movements make the places that are most in need of public goods visible to governments that otherwise might focus on other things. We usually think of a kind of simple relationship between movements and governments. Movements demand things, and if they're heard, governments deliver on those demands. Well, in most of the world, most cities really struggle to deliver things like housing, sanitation, and transportation. In fact, 1 in every 7 humans lives in a slum. Even if city governments wanted to deliver, they often can't. The future of our urban world depends on how cities are governed and for whom they're governed. Today's political challenges to democracy thrive on the inequalities both between and within cities. My research explains when and why city governments become able to deliver the public goods that drive political action. I've spent almost a year and a half in 2 global megacities, Sao Paulo and Johannesburg, and I'm trying to answer this question. I've talked with government officials and politicians in the municipal government offices, and I've stayed up with social movement leaders at late-night meetings. I've sat with property developers in penthouse office boardrooms, and I've shared meals with residents of new land occupations in their tents and shacks. And what I've found is that when city governments draw on and encourage the ideas and activism of housing movements, they become more able to deliver public goods to the most excluded parts of cities. Now, we're often looking for a silver bullet, a new technology, a new political messiah. But if we're serious about defending democracy and ending the inequalities that mark our urban world, we have to think differently. It's about both the poetry of movements making their demands and the prose of movements helping to build the government institutions that are able to deliver. This is the hard work that makes cities the building blocks for sustaining democracy. Thank you.